Before this flight landed, one quiet woman would be judged, mocked, and publicly dismissed by strangers who thought they knew everything. They saw Seat 16C as just another ordinary passenger, unaware that history was sitting beside them in silence. What began as casual small talk would slowly turn into subtle humiliation, whispered laughs, and confident arrogance. No one on that plane imagined that within hours, the same people would freeze in shock as the truth unfolded in the sky. Because when the radio crackled and fighter jets appeared outside the windows, the power in the cabin shifted instantly. This is the story of how underestimating a stranger became the biggest mistake of an entire flight, and how a single call sign forced the skies themselves to show respect. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from, because this story might make you think twice before judging anyone again. As the aircraft filled with movement and noise, the cabin buzzed with the restless energy of people heading somewhere important. Overhead bins slammed shut, phones rang with last-minute calls, and flight attendants moved with calm precision through the narrow aisles. In the middle of all that motion, Seat 16C held a woman who blended perfectly into the background. She sat by the window, posture straight, hands steady, eyes focused on a small stack of papers resting on her lap. Her clothes were neat but modest, her expression unreadable, the kind of person most travelers glance at and immediately forget. Across from her sat a sharply dressed man whose confidence seemed to spill into the aisle, speaking loudly about deals, numbers, and his own success. Behind them, two men discussed defense projects with exaggerated authority, their voices carrying as if the cabin were a conference room. Across the aisle, another passenger listened closely, quietly forming opinions without realizing she was doing it. Surrounded by noise, ego, and assumption, the woman in Seat 16C remained silent, unaware that every person around her had already decided who she was. It didn't take long for curiosity to turn into quiet judgment. The man beside her leaned back with a practiced smile, the kind used by people who believe every stranger is an opportunity or a category. He asked where she was headed, then guessed her profession before she could answer, speaking with confidence as if he were reading from a script. When she responded with only a few calm words, he took it as an invitation to explain her own life to her. Others nearby listened in, nodding, smiling, adding their own assumptions without ever asking a real question. To them, she fit neatly into a box they understood: safe, ordinary, predictable. Each comment carried a soft edge of superiority, not cruel, but dismissive enough to sting. She could have corrected them, could have stopped the guesses and the labeling. Instead, she stayed quiet, letting their voices fill the space while she remained still, as if she had already learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than explanation. The tone shifted when the conversation drifted from small talk into territory the men believed they truly owned. They began discussing military aircraft, tactics, and operations with loud confidence, tossing around technical terms like trophies. Facts bent to fit their egos, numbers inflated, capabilities exaggerated, each statement delivered as absolute truth. The woman by the window listened carefully, her eyes lifting slightly as the inaccuracies piled up one after another. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and precise, correcting a single detail without raising the temperature of the room. The reaction was immediate: a pause, then soft laughter. Smiles turned knowing, and glances were exchanged as if she had just revealed herself as someone pretending to belong. They responded with patronizing tones, questioning her sources, dismissing her words as something picked up from documentaries or books. Each correction she offered only deepened their amusement. What they saw was not insight, but a challenge to their authority, and they were determined to remind her, and everyone listening, that she was out of place. The moment came when they finally pushed her into a corner they were certain she couldn't escape. With a smirk and a tone meant to expose her, one of them asked if she had ever actually flown in a military aircraft, let alone during combat. The cabin seemed to lean in, waiting for her answer, already confident they knew it. She didn't hesitate, didn't dress it up, didn't try to impress anyone. She simply said no. That single word landed exactly as they hoped it would. Satisfied looks spread across their faces, as if a verdict had been reached and proven. The conversation turned sharper, more dismissive, their voices carrying the message that curiosity was fine, but pretending was not. To them, she was now just another civilian who had spoken out of turn. She accepted it without protest, sitting quietly as the weight of their judgment settled in, unaware that this was the lowest point before everything was about to turn upside down. Nearly 2 hours into the flight, just as the cabin settled into a dull rhythm of engines and muted conversation, the captain's voice broke through the speakers. He spoke calmly, but there was an edge in his tone that made people look up from their screens and half-finished drinks. Ahead of them, he explained, severe weather had forced a change in their route, and air traffic control was now coordinating closely with military aircraft in the area. At first, it sounded like a routine update, the kind travelers forget seconds later. But then he added that the aircraft would be temporarily escorted as they passed through restricted airspace. A ripple of unease moved through the cabin. Conversations faded, and heads turned toward the windows. Moments later, sleek fighter jets appeared alongside the plane, flying close enough to see the markings on their wings. Phones came out despite the rules, whispers spread, and nervous excitement filled the air. While others guessed wildly about danger or VIPs on board, the woman in seat 16C watched in silence, her expression unchanged, as if she understood something the rest of the cabin did not. Inside the cockpit, what began as routine coordination suddenly took an unexpected turn. The military escort requested confirmation of a specific passenger, not a seat count or fuel status, but a name. The captain paused, then followed protocol, asking a flight attendant to discreetly verify the identity of the person seated in 16C. As the attendant approached, the cabin remained unaware, still buzzing with speculation and half-formed theories. The woman looked up calmly and stated her full name without hesitation, her voice steady, almost familiar with this kind of moment. When the information was relayed back to the cockpit and passed to the fighter pilots, the response came instantly. The tone on the radio shifted, professional but unmistakably reverent. The escort confirmed her rank and status, identifying her as a legendary combat pilot whose name carried weight across the entire Air Force. They requested permission to render full military honors. In that instant, everything the passengers thought they knew about the quiet woman beside the window began to collapse. The captain switched on the passenger address system, and the moment his voice filled the cabin, every whisper stopped. He spoke slower now, with a gravity that demanded attention, announcing that the Air Force pilots escorting the aircraft had identified a highly honored officer on board. He revealed that the woman seated in 16C was one of the most decorated combat aviators in modern military history. Shock rippled through the cabin like a physical force, heads snapping toward the window seat no one had noticed before. Faces that once held smirks and confidence now froze in disbelief. Outside, the fighter jets shifted formation with flawless precision, moving into a ceremonial pattern reserved for heroes. Then a voice came through the speakers from one of the jets, addressing her directly with unmistakable respect. They spoke of a mission she had led, a life she had saved, and a legacy known to pilots across the world. As the jets dipped their wings in salute, the entire cabin sat in stunned silence, watching the sky itself honor the woman they had underestimated moments earlier. The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence the flight had faced. No one spoke, no one moved, as if breaking the moment would only deepen the shame settling into the cabin. The man who had confidently labeled her stared at the seat in front of him, his earlier bravado drained away. The others who had laughed and corrected her now avoided eye contact, their expressions tight with regret. Across the aisle, hands covered mouths, eyes widened, and quiet realizations spread from row to row. She didn't look around to see who was watching or who felt exposed. She remained exactly as she had been before, composed, grounded, untouched by the sudden shift in power. Respect had replaced arrogance in an instant, but it came too late to erase the assumptions that had already been made. The plane continued forward, carrying not just passengers, but a shared moment none of them would ever forget. As the fighter jets slowly peeled away and disappeared into the clouds, the cabin returned to its quiet. But something had changed in the air, something deeper than embarrassment or surprise. The woman in seat 16C gathered her papers just as she had before, her movement steady, her expression calm. She didn't seek apologies, and she didn't need acknowledgement. Her presence alone had already delivered the lesson. Around her, people sat with their thoughts, replaying words they wished they could take back. They had judged a life by posture, clothing, and silence, and the sky itself had corrected them. When the plane finally descended toward its destination, the memory of that salute stayed behind with every passenger. A reminder that true strength rarely announces itself, and the most extraordinary stories often sit quietly beside us, waiting for the right moment to be revealed.